Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, a weekly chat with Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's chief futurist, and the builders, dreamers, founders, and wild children of the IoT universe. This podcast can also be viewed on the Coffee with Mr. IoT YouTube channel.
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT. I'm Deloitte's chief IoT technologist. Oh, I just got a new title, chief futurist. And today my guest is Scott Buchholz. He is our emerging tech research director and also the CTO for government and public services. Welcome to the show, Scott.
It's great to be here.
So Scott, I wanted to talk to you because we just came out with Tech Trends again, 2020 Tech Trends. For the ones who don't know what we do every year in Tech Trends, can you give us a little bit intro about that?
Sure. We've been doing Tech Trends for about 11 years now. What we try to do is look 18 to 24 months into the future at what's coming next in enterprise technology. One of the things that we do that's a little bit different is we actually interview clients and share their stories. We do that in part because we think it's important for people to recognize that it's both possible, but also for people to get a sense of what the journey might look like as they look forward to try to figure out how to make pragmatic changes to head towards the future.
So Scott, it's talking about the future and it's looking forward. How much of that, you do research, how much of that is based in research and how much of that is what you hear from within Deloitte, what others tell you, what our clients tell us? And by the way, how does that feel to a researcher to look forward rather than looking back?
Well, to be fair, I'm not a researcher by nature. That was my parents' job. I leave that to them.
Okay.
We do a variety of different things. So we look at research that's going on. We look at trends and patterns. We look at what people are funding. We look across the board at a whole bunch of different things. We talk to the smartest people we can find inside Deloitte. We talk to our clients. We mix it all up, and then we try to figure out what does that mean and where are we going from here. And so it's a journey every year. It takes us several months to work through, but it's a lot of fun.
And so it's really not that hard for you since you're not a researcher. It's okay to look forward rather than looking back?
Well, let's say it doesn't hurt me to look forward. It doesn't physically pain me, if that's the question. But it's not that it's easy necessarily, but we have a bunch of people who actually do primary research. We do some of that as well, but it's not necessarily the primary driver.
I often do. I had one with Mark Caudelia, who was in our research team. You probably know him. And so we did some of the research stuff together, and I always enjoy the conversation with a true researcher rather than someone like me who takes other people's research like Mark's or yours. So Scott,
are you trying to say I'm a fake researcher?
Okay, good one. Gonna take that back. You're a real researcher. I'm just one that works with researchers and tries to learn from them. So I want to take your executive summary. I read through that and sort of like it's in a certain sort, but I'd love to go a bit out of sort if that's okay with you, and start with what I'm the most comfortable with. What's dearest and nearest to my heart is the digital twin. And so I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts on this. And particularly, there's something at the end where you say there will be a digital twin for everything at some point in time. And I guess I want to end and hear from you. What's your thought? What are we going to have digital twins of us? And what is a digital twin of us?
Sure. I mean, if you think about it, at the end of the day, a digital twin is a virtual simulation of physical reality. The technology's been around on some level for 20 or 30 years. People have been doing mock-ups in computers and simulations of planes and automobiles for at least that period of time. And a lot of things have changed, right? So if you ask what's different now, what we're starting to see is there's more capability in the platforms that comes out natively. So people can now build bigger, better, faster simulations. There's better interoperability between the platforms and the physical world. So a lot of that is the IoT devices and sensors. There are increasing standards, but increasing volumes of integration so that the twins can not just take in the physical reality, but also start actuating and acting upon it. And then the cloud providers and other things are making the technology easier to get to and more accessible. And so that combination of things is actually making it so that people are now much more able to not just create digital twins, but actually connect them to the physical world and do things. They're using machine learning to run dozens or thousands or millions of simulations to try to figure out optimal patterns and usage. And the most interesting use case is people are actually trying to figure out, how do I simulate if I'm moving to an as-a-service model, for example. I'm a physical manufacturer. I want to start selling things as a service. What does that mean? How do I do that? And then, as you mentioned, people are also trying to figure out, how do I create a digital twin of the body? Depending on who you ask, I mean, that's a couple decades out, but you can envision, if you look, some of the researchers we talk to are trying to figure out, how do I go from the genome up to, they would say, the phenotype of the population. So how do I go from genome to likelihood of disease, going through the organs and basically how the genes are expressed to figure out who is likely to get heart disease, who is likely to get certain types of cancer, by being able to predict from the genome. And that's one of the steps that we would need to have better simulations of ourselves. So lots going on.
So digital twins, and I mean, when you talk about the digital twins of us, I have to think of one of Ray Kurzweil's books and talks, when he talks about, taking himself, sort of like his mind, and putting that into something and storing it forever. He said something that's interesting to me. He said that, Ray Kurzweil said that it's only the last 12 to 18 months we've really been able to do AI, because compute now is available to do really true AI. Is that also one of the things that's really been driving to do digital twins and really, as you said, actuate and really respond and react to it?
Certainly the availability of computational power has increased. And that is a big helpful driver, particularly when you're trying to do large scale simulations and lots of simulations. If you think about it, one of the groups we talked to was the Australian Air Traffic Controller Services, and they're trying to model the entire airspace. The interesting thing is they're doing it to look forward. If you think about it, in part, they're trying to optimize the person-to-person communication of the air traffic towers to the airplanes to better help optimize the airplanes. But they also are doing it in part because they recognize that what's going to happen at the lower airspace is that you're going to have self-piloting drones, flying taxis, and other things, and you're not going to be able to have a human air traffic controller telling all the pizza delivery drones, how to not collide with one another as they're flying through the sky. And so some of this is they're trying to get out in front of that problem, which I thought was actually a really clever. But if you think about that, that means a really big problem really fast across Australia.
So you set up a question, and I'm curious if you want to answer it and how you want to answer it.
Sure.
I'm a pilot. I fly here in the States. One of the biggest challenges for me has been learning how to talk to air traffic control. English isn't my first language. Sometimes they talk so fast. My standard phrase is "say again." It's like the best thing I ever learned. Yep. And to this day, it baffles me that it's verbal communication, right? I mean, why, they enforced ADS-B standards to communicate altitude and where we are. Why didn't come with this instructions that I can read and don't have to repeat back? So it's interesting to me that you talk about this from an Australian point of view. Is Australia ahead of us in this? What do you see in the US? Give me a little bit of a worldview, if you have some thoughts on this, a global view around this particular technology, maybe, or some other stuff.
Well, there's two parts to that, right? One is the airspace question, and I am far from an airspace expert, nor am I a pilot. So what I would observe is I think that the Australians are trying some things in prototyping and piloting that may be ahead of what the FAA is currently thinking about and trying as they're going through the modernization journey here in the US. More broadly, in terms of the use of digital twins generally, a lot of manufacturers have been using them for years. They're trying to find out more better use cases. That's a global phenomenon, right? Wherever products are designed and used, that's absolutely happening, and more of it is happening. I'm not sure that anybody you could necessarily say is ahead in terms of digital twins. The technology actually spreads pretty quickly around the world. I think it's less geographical and more institutional. So some organizations are further out in terms of figuring out the art of the possible.
I have an interesting story. I was working with the World Economic Forum. They have an industry forward-looking innovation branch here in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the projects they were sponsoring and working on was drones, as you talked about. And did you know where they were piloting this, in what country?
I do not.
In Rwanda. I mean, I really was sort of very surprised by that, but it made sense. It was really what came together was technology, government, and an ability to, in an agile way, try out new, I wouldn't call it legislation, but rules and ideas around how to rule it that they couldn't do in places like the United States and Europe or the EU or something like this. So I thought it was very interesting that they picked Rwanda for that. But in any case, I just thought that was fitting for this.
Yeah, I think I saw that. And it was in part because they needed to get health supplies to remote villages. And it actually turns out to be not just a great solution to the problem, but a government that was willing to let people try stuff out. So
yeah,
100%.
Exactly. That's great. So let's switch off the digital twin. I picked the first one. Let you pick the next one. What was the one that surprised you the most of our tech trends this year that made it into the list?
Maybe as opposed to telling you the one that I found most surprising, maybe the one that I most personally want to see happen, which is human experience platforms. And that's really about thinking about effective computing. So effective computing means trying to teach computers EQ, or emotional intelligence, how to sense emotions, how to understand the context of what's going on, to pair with a lot of the IQ and machine learning and things that have been going on, because those two things together, context, emotion, and also ability to react and respond, can potentially transform the way we have run call centers, the way we have interact with kiosks and other things. So wouldn't it be great if you could walk up to a kiosk and it would be able to recognize me and say, Mr. Buchholz, I see you have a package in your hands. Would you like to buy postage for that, as opposed to forcing me maybe to click 15 times on some stupid screen in order to buy a stamp? It's pretty obvious what I'm trying to do. So it's really taking the ability of a human being out of the human context and actually putting it into the machine, and so that I also don't find myself screaming, agent, agent, on the phone trees to try to get to a human being to help me with my problem. So that, to me, is really the most exciting and promising one. And it's really quite amazing what people are doing in that regard.
What's the response been from people that you talk to, our clients, to, first of all, I gotta say, fantastic rebranding from AI to human experience platform. Not sure that was the idea. That's how it seems to me, and I love it. But second, how do people respond to it? What's their reaction? How do they feel about this human experience platform and EQ through AI?
I think most people are excited in principle, right? And sometimes the question is, how do we get there from here? How do we get started? You know, what Amelia would say, who was one of our authors, is this is the potential promise of having human connection at scale. It's really hard to scale up the number of people we have in our call centers, but it's much easier to see how we can scale up computing and virtual call center agents. And if we can make them more human, better able to understand when they're in over their heads and phone a friend who's a human being, right? How do we hand off intelligently? All of that kind of stuff. Suddenly, we're all going to have much better experiences, and we'll actually be much happier because suddenly it's not quite as frustrating. There aren't as many, you know, dial 7 to, you know, go down the phone tree kinds of applications. So I think clients are excited too in general and trying to figure out, where do we start? How do we get started?
One of we have only a few more minutes left, but I want to talk about one thing before I go to my final one, which is probably my personal favorite. But one of the things you have is a title called Architecture Awakens.
Yep.
And having been a CIO myself, I always found people don't pay for architecture, particularly in IT. People pay for features and function, yet without the right underpinnings, the features and functions run out, or you start being so kludgy that it breaks 6 months after, and then it breaks every week after that. So are you seeing a shift there? What's the shift, and why the shift now?
Well, I think the shift that we're seeing, particularly in larger organizations, is that people have taken their most senior technologists, called architects, and they've put them in portfolio governance roles for years. They've had diffuse responsibility, they've had indirect responsibility, and it's mostly been finger wagging or telling people what to do or what not to do. What we're increasingly seeing is people saying, you know, the highest and best use of these individuals is not telling a whole bunch of people what to do, but telling a specific group what to do. So they're taking them out of those portfolio governance roles and putting them in charge of a product, a service, a system, and basically saying, you are the chief technologist, the lead technologist for this from start to finish through operations. We're going to have your pager buzz at night when this stuff goes bonkers, and basically thinking about rescoping the incentives for the architects in such a way that they're actually helping move the technology forward and making it more stable and those sorts of things, not just opining from afar. And as we see this happen, why is it happening now? Because people are realizing that they don't get a lot of value out of the portfolio governance, but they can absolutely see the value of taking their best technologists and putting them in charge of really hard things, really new things, or really important things.
It was interesting. I think there was another article we're not going to get to talk about, but it's the finance and the future of IT. And I think the creative new ways finance and IT work together enable some of those architectural changes, because often they cost money. And it's a great article to point at. I want to close with a personal question for me and for you, and it's about the ethical technology and trust. I so often get asked about security, and often that includes privacy, and people bundle them together, when really I think trust is even more important. And so you've had a whole article around this. Just tell us about it, but then please close with telling me what can I do? What can all of us do around this? Because I think this isn't just an individual issue for the chief security officer or for the CIO, or it's something every one of us can do. So tell us about it. I love the article. And I'd love to close on that.
Great. When we were thinking about sort of what's next, what we started thinking and realizing is our trust problem really comes from technology. So technology, our ability to collect, scale, analyze, utilize data at scale, is actually creating the problems where not everybody is as certain that other people have our best interest in mind, but they may know more about us than we know about ourselves. And that wasn't the case 30 or 40 years ago, when all our personal data was stored in individual manila folders. So now, right, when we're thinking about it, what happens is you realize brands and trust are synonymous. So brands were created in a time when you needed to be able to scale the idea of trust across not just the person you knew, but a brand and other things. And what brands and organizations are starting to realize is that trust is actually the crux of the issue, and ethical technology and security and privacy and doing the right thing when nobody's looking, all of those things are actually the really important things to be doing to support the creation and ongoing trust that people have in your brand and company and organization. And as such, we believe that it's an everybody problem, right? So, organizations need to look at this 360 degrees. It's a training problem, it's a definition problem, it's a technology problem, it's a security problem, but everybody needs to do their part to make sure that their organization is behaving in a way that's consistent with the organizational values, and help continue moving those things forward as we collectively move forward into this future.
I have this fantasy that many of the things we do, we talk about change management, but really it's about, do people trust what we do?
Yeah.
It's change is a big part, but at the end of it, it's like, do they trust? So any closing thoughts on how we all can sort of contribute to that trust question in our own roles?
It was interesting. Professor Dyes, who we talked to from Carnegie Mellon about this, said his vision was to see ethics elevated to the same level that user experience has been elevated. Right? And so I don't know whether or not he's right, in the long run, but what I would say is if everybody is at least stopping and asking whether or not this is the ethical thing to do as opposed to just the expedient thing to do, as we're all making individual choices, whether we're developers or analysts or designers or users, I think that we will collectively be better off because we're raising the collective sensitivity to the importance of the topic. And so my hope is that we make some substantive progress on this over the next couple of years because people are starting to realize it's important and customers are starting to ask for it and demand it.
Well, Scott, anything we didn't talk about out of the report, anything that's personal to you that you want to share before we get going here?
No, I actually thought this was a great conversation, and I really appreciated your time, Robert.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. This brings another Coffee with Mr. IT to a close.
Thanks for listening to Coffee with Mr. IoT. To subscribe or to listen to more episodes, search for Coffee with Mr. IoT in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at deloitte.com/us/coffee with Mr. IoT. To watch the video version of our show, go to YouTube and search Coffee with Mr. IoT.